Hi, Eric.
Hi, Aaron. How are you?
Um, I'm excited. I actually wanted to start with the heartwarming stuff.
Oh, okay. The opposite of how it is in David O. McKay and the Rise of Modern Mormonism.
That's right. So in 1964, right, Lyndon B. Johnson was elected president of the United States.
Yes, he was.
And quoting from David O. McKay, The Rise and the Rise of Modern Mormonism, chapter 13, Politics and the Church, it said, 3 U.S. flags flew over the Capitol during the inauguration. One went to Johnson, another to Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and the third to David O. McKay, president of our church.
How about that? Only 3.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that I was really surprised. I think that's where I realized that their friendship was really genuine
Yeah,
because there's no real political reason to send David O. McKay a flag.
right. Or to fly a flag above the inauguration just for him.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
Um, yeah, I mean, it was awesome. And in fact, not only that, but Lyndon B. Johnson, is it B? I think it's a B.
It is a B.
It's got to be a B.
Yes, because he is a B.
He invited Motab to sing,
He did.
the Mormon
Oh,
Tabernacle Choir.
I meant to look up and see how many how many inaugurations the choir performed for. It was a little controversial when the church sent them for Trump's inauguration.
Uh-huh.
We send them for everyone who asks. I remember Reagan had asked, but that was the last time I thought about it, was in 2016, and I failed to look it up and see who else they'd performed for. But Johnson, so at least one Democrat.
There you go. In fact, Utah voted Democrat for that election, mainly because of McKay and their friendship. So there's this great quote about the choir, right? So they needed 300 seats, but the press would have to be kicked out for them to get it, right?
That's a lot of press.
Yeah. The president is reported to have told the standing committee, insulting language, that he had invited the Tabernacle Choir and he wasn't going to have half a choir. He wanted all 300, no matter how many seats it cost. It was great. So, and the reason why, it was because of this friendship. They had this good relationship and they talked to each other by phone. President Johnson would call President McKay just to talk, just to hash out ideas, just to enjoy company. They visited each other. Seemed to be like awesome. And I guess the reason I wanted to bring it up was because it's just a nice story of politics, and which is what we're talking about today, talking about politics in the church.
About politics because nobody's sick of talking about politics right now.
Well, it does seem to be the season.
It is the season, yes.
It seems to be the best time to do it, I suppose. So let's see. I suppose if you get nothing else out of this podcast episode today, it should be that you should vote and you shouldn't mail in your ballot anymore. You should take it because it's too late. You need to go vote in person or take your ballot into a dropout box.
Yeah, it depends a little state by state, but I thought Kavanaugh's opinion was remarkable this week.
Yes,
it's I'm boggled, absolutely boggled by what his decision was, the way he wrote it.
Yeah, and we're allowed to talk about this stuff because it's politics week.
That's right.
Chapter 12 of David O. McKay and the Rise of Modern Mormonism is called Communism.
Well, it's a little more than that. It's confrontation with communism.
That's right. Confrontation with
communism.
It is
very confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
Although there are no actual communists. Not really.
That's true.
There are some across the ocean, but all the confrontation with communism, it's not happening with actual communists.
So I found this chapter. Well, you describe it. How did you describe it?
Chapter 12, the communism chapter?
Yeah.
I found it depressingly relevant to us right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really got under my skin. I think it might have no matter what, but it really did because it's 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And it also explained to me a lot about it explained to me a lot about why people felt the way they did about President Benson, because most of everything actually that happens in this chapter is before I come to know President Benson. I am not aware of President Benson before he becomes the prophet. I'm 8 or something when that happens, and I do not have the entire Quorum of the 12 memorized. And so I'm not familiar with his past as a rabble rouser, as a troublemaker, as a village burner, and I'm not really aware of the controversy and the nervousness people have of him until much later. But now I understand why they felt that way.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking a lot about Ezra Taft Benson today, and about President McKay, and about Dwight Eisenhower,
Hubie Brown, John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy.
Past the thousands, Aaron.
what a strange chapter. I didn't expect this when we embarked on this journey.
Oh, what did you expect? Do you remember?
I was expecting to talk about things like correlation, and like we did, and the temple building and stuff.
The book?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Selected these chapters specifically.
Yeah.
At the end of our last episode.
Yeah. So I didn't really know what I was going to get out of this, and wow, what a rabbit hole this thing on communism is. But I agree with you. It just
fictional white rabbit and not the delightful bunnies of nature.
That's right. Yeah. So let's start with some definitions. Okay.
Oh, okay. Let's do it.
The reason why it's important to do some definitions is because communism and the church, well, they kind of go way back. So in 1830, right? In the 1830s.
I remember it well.
Yep. On February 9th, 1831, Joseph Smith received a revelation. And that revelation detailed the law of consecration.
Communist.
Wait, are you calling me one?
Just to green that up, I think you're a little suspect. Yeah.
So tell me about the law of consecration.
Well, if we were in Sunday school right now, a gentleman who's probably about 58, probably, at least that's how I imagine him, so maybe he's more like 78 now, would raise his hand and say, well, but it's not like communism, because you get to own your own stuff and you agree to do it, and there's freedom or something like that. There are variations on the theme.
Let's help out our fellow non-member brethren and sisterin that listen to the show. What actually was it?
So it was so Aaron, you've heard of Zion, where the city that was taken up into God.
Sorry, did you mean Zion?
No. So anyway,
that's the Matrix.
You totally knocked me off my... Okay, so one of the things about Zion, one of the things about people who are so good that God walks among them, is they share all things in common. There are no rich and there are no poor. Like that is an idea that is in the past.
It's a very celestial idea as well, yes. Right?
And I read an article this week. I didn't read the whole thing because I was very busy this week with the new issue of Fearreantum, but I read the first half because I was just curious what the thesis was. And the thesis was exactly what I would have guessed it was. And it warned that kicking Trump out of office next week is no guarantee that America will get back to normal and that we won't have the violence continuing and we won't continue marching towards more violence. And their point was that in their research, it seems that the number one predictor of social unrest and civil war and everything in between is economic inequality. There's nothing inherently friendly or societally helpful, or there's nothing good about income inequality. And the more unequal it is, the more likely we are to have something like the rise of Nazism or the Great Depression. Like a lot of horrible things get started because of income inequality. And Scripture says that the people of Zion, they had all things in common, and God walked with them. So the law of consecration is a law.
You're talking about the people of Enoch.
That's right, the people of Enoch. Not whatever city of Zion, and there's probably a dozen of them in the United States in different states. But ultimately, this is the goal, is for us to have this sort of radical equality that is associated with Christianity.
And what happened to the city of Enoch?
Got taken into heaven.
That's right.
There was no reason to stay here anymore because they'd mastered it. And that's why it's very important to vote for capitalism, not for socialism. Lindsay was just reading a new post on Design Mom's blog, and somebody, I forget if it was Design, it couldn't have been Design Mom, she's in France right now, but somebody in one of the comments said she saw someone in her church parking lot with a bumper sticker that said something along the lines of, if Jesus were here, he would drive an SUV, he would, there were three things he would do, and then he would vote for Trump is the fourth one.
I see.
Because Jesus loves capitalism, which a close reading of the New Testament allows no, I mean, where's okay, it's crazy. Like, one thing that in seminary last week, we were talking, we made it into 3rd Nephi, and we were talking about the differences between the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Temple. And one of the key differences is just, it's a different rhetorical situation, right? Like, Jesus in the old world is some poor guy out of the desert who has ragged clothes and probably lice, right? Jesus comes to Bountiful and he says almost the same words, but he comes down from heaven in a beam of light. He is a God. You hear things differently when a God is saying them versus some prophet you're kind of fond of. And so when Jesus is talking in Judea, he's talking to poor people almost exclusively. And the idea of what to do with money, the stuff Jesus says about money, is purely theoretical for most of them. Most of them don't have anything. That's not really true in the New World. Like, some of the people were elites. It's a different mix of people who hear him in the New World. And all of a sudden, when Jesus is saying some of the radical things he says about wealth, for instance, give it away, it probably sounds different. And maybe you need to hear it from a God. I'm sorry. Are we against capitalism in this podcast? I'm sorry. I got to say that the Trump years have radicalized me leftward more than anything else could have. So, yeah.
It's interesting because I know I have a lot of friends. I have several friends who listen to this podcast who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? And I don't know some of them, I don't know which way they're going to vote in this election. Some of them have written in others of them like they didn't want to vote at all. They live in states where it
doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, which is annoying. There's a whole nother discussion about electoral colleges.
Yes, I don't think there's in David O. McKay.
So personally, I'm trying to avoid a statement like "vote for X" on the show, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to.
Well, normally I have always tried to appear to be politically neutral.
Right.
But the rise of Donald Trump in 2015 and 2016 has changed the rules. You can't pretend that they're equal anymore. You can't pretend that both sides are more or less the same. I think it is immoral to pretend that anymore.
The Face and Hat is not affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's right, or any particular political party. I don't know about you, Aaron, but I have never been registered with a political party ever in my life.
I don't know if I am or not.
So, oh, well.
I think I am.
Well, California, the most popular party after the Democrats in California is no party affiliation. So you probably belong to the same non-party that I do. Yeah. Republicans poll 3rd in California.
Well, so what's the difference then between the law of consecration and communism?
Well, I kind of hate the question.
Wait, what's the law of consecration? Oh, right, we said it already. We give up everything, but it's specific. There's actually.
Well, kind of, because the law of consecration and the United Order we often conflate because they're similar ideas. They both come out of the teachings of Joseph Smith, but they're not identical. And this gets
the United Order was practiced, right?
Yes.
In like the 1830s.
The law of consecration is literally you covenant to give everything. to God and his church, everything, all
Yeah.
of it. And maybe he doesn't get around to taking it from you, but that is the promise you have made. It is like, young man, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor and come follow me. That is the promise. It's just nobody's, Jesus hasn't sent me a bill yet. So
Yeah.
I don't really know how I'll react when that moment comes, because it hasn't happened.
All right. So what about the United Order then?
The United Order had more specific rules set up. It was, you give everything to the bishop, I believe, and then he redistributes it according to your needs, and nobody else needs your pictures of grandma, so you'll get those back, right? Like, and there were a few communities where it lasted decades, but ultimately it's something that only worked when the number of people never broke 3 digits. You can't do it with strangers. You really have to know everyone intimately to pull it off.
Yeah, yeah. And there still was this sense of ownership, right? You didn't have private, it's not, they didn't abolish private property. You still owned things, right?
Right.
So, okay, fine. Kind of sounds like communism.
Yeah, and that's why I hate the question, because communism has a lot of different variations. Like, is modern Chinese communism, is that what Marx was talking about? I don't think so. But they're all, spelled the same way. And so the question of, like, is something communism or not becomes a rabbit hole, if you will, in which you can argue definitions forever and never reach conclusions, because there are too many different possible definitions to be addressed.
Let's stop some of the Mormons that are listening to our show from devolving into utter apoplexy and tell them what we really think, which is that communism and United Order are not the same thing.
No, obviously not. They're obviously not. But it does raise the interesting question of, just like how Latter-day Saints over the course of the 20th century became the most rabid enforcers of, like, the nuclear family. Why? Well, I don't know, but maybe it's because we were trying to prove we were normal after the polygamy thing. Maybe our deep and almost pathological hatred of communism that developed in the 20th century is related, because we saw that it looked a little bit like something we used to do, and we're trying to be normal now.
So let's listen to a statement from 1942, right? And this is
9 years
from the church
before David O. McKay becomes the prophet, but I believe he's in the first presidency then.
I'm not sure.
Is it
probably
the first presidency statement, or just a?
This is on Wikipedia. It says the church issued the following statement. Okay.
It's
well, I can follow the link and figure it out.
It's fine.
Okay. This was issued in General Conference by J. Reuben Clark,
who was, I believe, also in the first presidency.
Yeah. Here it is. Communism and all other similar isms bear no relationship whatever to the United Order. They are merely the clumsy counterfeits which Satan always devises of the gospel plan. The United Order leaves every man free to choose his own religion as his conscience directs. Communism destroys man's God-given free agency. The United Order glorifies it or glories it. United Latter-day Saints cannot be true to their faith and lend aid, encouragement, or sympathy to any of these false philosophies. The principal complaint that David O. McKay had with communism was agency.
Yeah.
And he was not a fan of communism.
No, he wasn't off the deep end, but he had very strong feelings about it.
In fact, in 1936, they even had a stronger statement, right? Communism being thus hostile to loyal American citizenship and incompatible with true church membership. Of necessity, no loyal American citizen and no faithful church member can be a communist. So the reason he didn't like it was agency. So let's just state briefly the doctrine of agency, right? Which is the ability to choose. And so fundamental in man's eternal progress is his inherent right to choose, right? This is quoting McKay, that the Lord would defend it even at the price of war. right? And this was in some relation to World War II at that point. So the right to choose. I mean, we believe in the church in this pre-existence, right, in which a war in heaven was fought over agency, the ability to choose your own destiny, as it were, right? And I think you and I would both agree that communism, as it was implemented in the Cold War, really did take away agency from people.
It was largely a mess, to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not here to defend East Germany or anything like that.
Okay, so what happened that was so crazy in the 1950s and 60s with communism and some of our church leaders?
You know, it's really hard. I'm not an expert, and there are a million books on this, Red. Go read a book if you care. But it's hard to know how things got started, but it's easy to see how things snowballed to the point where now there are literally members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who don't think that the government should pay for food stamps because it takes away people's agency and will send our country on a direct route to destruction. Can I quote a president of the United States that Brother McKay never met, or would that be inappropriate?
That would be fine.
All right, so this is Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
Jimmy Carter said, "If you don't want your tax dollars to help the poor, then stop saying you want a country based on Christian values, because you don't."
That's great.
So there's a difference between a communist society, as described in these statements, which sucks away people's agency and turns them into automatons of the state. There's a difference between that and building a society that's based on our values. And if our values have anything to do with the New Testament, then it does have something to do with redistributing wealth from the rich to the poor. You just can't walk through the New Testament without realizing that. I feel like that's a really difficult argument to have, that the New Testament is not in favor of taking care of the poor. And you can make the argument, I guess, that this is not government's job, and people, it seems like all the weight of that is based on Jesus saying, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." It seems like that statement is the entire reason. I'm overstating things, but why government shouldn't help poor people. But government is the people. That's something we as Americans believe, right? Like, when the time of human events, it becomes necessary for us to kick the King George out and start our own government. It's because we, the people, you don't govern because you feel like governing. You govern because you have the consent of the governed. And so government can only do what we, the people, want. And if we, the people, believe in good things, the government ought to do good things. I wonder how many people have said they can't listen to me now and have quit this episode. I was not intending to get this rabble-rousery, but it's almost the election, and we have had a madman in the White House. Yes, those are my opinions. I look forward to some real science being done on his brain, but so it can move beyond opinion. But anyway, on the bright side, can I say something nice about Trump?
Sure.
I just read an article in the latest issue of Wired about Cyber Command, which is, I do not know enough about the state of cyber warfare right now to really know what the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do is. It does seem that no matter how you feel about the escalation of cyber warfare under Trump, the way he has, the people he's put in charge are thoughtful and good and decent people. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about my general opinion about politics, right, is that most people are good people, right? And that most people are trying to do good things.
Most people, yeah, I totally agree.
But there are some real disagreements about how to do it. Some people really fundamentally believe that the best way to handle the poor is in a trickle-down manner, right?
Yeah.
And then others think that has never worked. And that the only way to help the poor is through wealth redistribution in a forced manner.
Right.
And then
that's the problem with this discussion, is this idea that somehow it's a dichotomy, that there's only two options, which is obvious nonsense.
Right. But it's nicely polarizing. So let's talk about polarization, because I think that that is a fundamental topic from this chapter,
From both of
right?
the chapters, really.
Right. Polarization is a great way to fill seats, and it's a great way to sell product, and it's a great way to get dollars. But boy, is it bad for us.
Yeah.
Boy, is it bad to be polarized. Um, there were three events that happened to President Benson that really polarized him. Not Benson, President McKay.
President McKay.
Yeah, on the subject of communism. The first was in the 40s, okay, when he was in charge of a bunch of missions, right? Reading generally from the book. The Iron Curtain began to choke off church activities in Czechoslovakia, and the only mission headquartered in there. In a move that forced the church hands, Czech police arrested 2 missionaries earlier in 1950, alleging they had entered a restricted area. The missionaries were held incommunicado for 3 weeks, and it gradually became clear that their release was contingent upon the church closing the mission. This quid pro quo was a bitter pill for McKay to swallow, and a month after closing the mission, he remarked in his April 1950 conference, every member of the church should take a lesson from what has occurred in that communistically dominant land. Okay, so 2 other events. One was the invasion of South Korea by communist North Korea. And what that happened, that meant the draft happened, which meant that we had a big reduction in the missionary force.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to preemptively abandon the Hong Kong mission, right? So those three, the preemptive abandonment of the Chinese mission, the reduction by 2/3 of the missionary force, and this event in Czechoslovakia, they were, the book calls these events assaults on his belief because of communism, right?
Yeah.
And then when he became president, in his first interview, he warned, a 3rd world war is inevitable unless communism is soon subdued. Communism yields to nothing but force.
You know,
right?
I just realized, because he also predicts that it will collapse, right? And he's right.
He does.
He doesn't live to see it. It's what, 20 years after he dies.
Right.
And I just realized, you know, that's one of the big problems with prophecy. Like the second coming is this way too, right? Like you can see something's coming, oh prophet, but man, it's usually further away than you want to believe. So one of the big events, of course, of communism in America, the one we all remember, or the 2 we all remember, is the House Un-American Committee and or House Un-American Activities Committee, whatever it's called, and Joseph McCarthy, the senator who was interviewing people. Maybe the Hollywood blacklisting. Maybe that's another one that sticks in our mind. And they all sort of get combined into the same thing, and they're obviously connected. But America as a whole, the country, the populace, like the overreaching of Joseph McCarthy and some of those other political missteps of changing this monster into something it wasn't, collapsed, right? Because most people are good people. Most people can read a newspaper and understand the truth, and it falls apart completely.
So tell me, I have 2 questions. Yeah. First, what was he actually doing to people? And second, what was this communist conspiracy that he was so worried about?
Well, I mean, McCarthy believed that, you know, some huge percentage of government was actually run by lizard people who eat babies. Or no, sorry, that's QAnon. It's the same basic idea. And these communists are in everything. They're secretly controlling things. It won't be long till they overthrow the government and blah, 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 blah. And in the process, what do? You have to find these villains. And so he pulls them in. The House Un-American Activities Committee pulls them in. If I got the name of that wrong, I'm going to get roasted, I hope, and appropriately so. But they grill people and they ruin them and they ruin their reputations and they force them to turn in their friends or else they will face dire consequences. And after a while, it becomes obvious that there's nothing here and we're just being mean. And that's no good. And at that point, most of the country self-corrects. The fear of communism obviously doesn't go away, but people are more sensible about it. But that leaves a void for the crazy people. which is where the John Birch Society will happily step in and fill that space.
Okay, so before you go there, though, just it's important to note that President McKay, McCarthy was censured.
Yes.
By the I guess maybe by the Senate
I
or something.
believe it was by the Senate. Yes.
And if I remember the section in the chapter, an LDS fellow actually led the committee that investigated.
Yes,
him.
Which was fascinating. That was something I had never heard before.
Yeah, and so when the censure was over,
Arthur Watkins, who's
Arthur Watkins.
There were so many interesting quotations from him. Like I wrote on the front page of my copy of the David O. McKay the name of his memoirs because I feel like I need to go find it after I finish this book.
It's really great. At the end of the committee hearing, McKay called Watkins and congratulated him on the result of the censure. And Watkins said this was just awesome, and it was one of the best things that happened to him. So McKay was on the side of most of the rest of the country when this was. We don't know what we're supposed to do to fight communism, but that was too much.
This is not right. Yeah.
Okay, so enter Ezra Taft Benson.
Yes, he's already an apostle at this point. It doesn't mention this in the book, I don't think, but he is the apostle who was sent to post-war Europe to help, to be the point man for the church's efforts to help over there. He has a connection to Europe. He'll later go back as a mission president in Europe in the middle of our story. But for whatever reason, he was political before this. He was involved in, again, it's not in the book and I didn't look it up, but he was involved in various political interests before this point. And now with this gap, this hole.
Well, he was he was the agriculture secretary.
Right, for Eisenhower, who became the Secretary of Agriculture, and an unusually well-covered one. I've read a little bit about this in the past, not recently, but he was in the newspaper a lot more than your average Secretary of the Agriculture. Aaron, do you know who the Secretary of Agriculture is?
I was about to ask you the same thing. I have no idea.
No idea. Can't remember the last time I saw the Secretary of Agriculture in the paper.
Yeah.
Which I guess is probably a good thing because I'm mostly aware of the secretaries that are in the process of destroying their departments. So maybe he's fine. Or she. I don't know. I genuinely have no idea.
Okay, so yes, filling this hole of crazy people.
Yeah, and so there's this hole where McCarthy, this gap in the American consciousness, and the John Birch Society is born to fill that gap. And Benson finds himself drawn more and more into that world, especially after Eisenhower's term ended. There's a joke, and I don't remember who said it originally, but you know that that old story about like, where do I find an honest man, and like there isn't one anywhere. Do you know what I'm talking about here, Aaron? Anyway, it's an old, I think it goes back to Greece. I don't know though. Somebody more intelligent or more well-read than me can mention it to us. But there was the joke that, well, now you can just send that person, the man who spent his life looking for one honest man, you can send him to the White House because there he is. Like, not everybody likes Eisenhower's politics, of course, but people respect him as a person. And yet the John Birch Society will eventually claim that he is a closet communist, and Ezra Taft Benson, who was his Secretary of Agriculture and who worked with him closely, will refuse to defend him from being a closet communist.
Yeah, and Dwight Eisenhower never figures out why.
Yeah,
why did this? He more lamented it.
Yeah, he didn't know about it for a long time because he stayed completely out of politics once he left the White House. But when he did find out about it, he was just mystified, and you get the sense that his feelings were hurt.
Okay, so there's something really crazy that you just said. Okay,
just one thing.
Yeah. Okay, so this society, the John Birch Society, believed and organized like lots of people to tell everybody that Eisenhower was a communist.
Well, that wasn't their main point, but yeah, that was one thing they said.
They said lots of things. They are essentially the birth of right-wing like
Yeah, when we think of like the far right in America,
politics. Yeah.
we're thinking of the children of John Birch. Although I feel
Yeah.
bad for poor John Birch, he had nothing to do with this.
Actually, he's quoted on the Wikipedia article about it as somebody who knew him didn't think he'd be happy about him.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a guy that was shot by a communist, like in World War II or something.
Yes.
So they just took his name.
Well, I think he was a missionary, actually. I don't think he was a soldier. But anyway, yeah, he was killed by Chinese communists, and he's believed to be the first death of the Cold War. Some people say. Anyway, that's why the society is named after him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they organize, they publish pamphlets, they try to, and they fight communism. That's what they say they do. That's what their goal is.
Yeah.
is to fight the communist conspiracy. They give talks, and Benson says there's no other non-church organization that is doing more to help fight communism, and loves them.
Yes.
And McKay loves him too, but more privately.
and with more reservation, especially as time goes on.
As time goes on, it gets more and more clear that it's getting crazier and crazier, and McKay does start to distance himself from Benson. But the problem is that near the end of his life, he was starting to, get older, right? Nobody really knows why he gave mixed messages, but he did. He gave mixed signals. And so both parties, the people who were against the John Birch Society and those that were for, had quotations that they thought justified their position, right?
This is a theme throughout the book and other chapters too. It's not just in these chapters. When McKay gets into his 90s, he seems to lose the ability to maintain a constant stand. He becomes someone who's sort of tells everybody what they want to hear and agrees with the last person he talked to. And I'm not really overstating it, but I'm saying it in a way that makes him sound completely senile. And I don't think he was, but
and it's also an inference that doesn't appear to be directly stated in the book.
Yeah, it is stated a little bit more directly in an earlier chapter. Have I told the story about Mormon doctrine on the podcast before?
No.
Would you like to hear it, or should we save it for a later episode? It's relevant to this.
We can do both.
Okay, that's true. What a good point, Aaron. So when Bruce R. McConkie published Mormon doctrine, he did it without permission, and he did it in a way that seemed to give the book a lot of authority. And
dude, I always thought it was an official reference of the church.
A lot of people thought so, and it's taken, I think a lot of people don't now, but I'm sure there are still some people who feel that way about it. And they were not happy with it. And I forget the number, but they had a couple members of the First Presidency and the Quorum of 12 go through it, and they found literally thousands of things that they did not think were correct. And David O. McKay was unhappy with it, and it was not allowed to go into anyway, we'll talk more about it later, but he's basically shut it down, not as much as a lot of high leadership thought he should have, but it went out of print. But then Bruce R. McConkie felt like it was a good book and he wanted to come back out, and late in President McKay's life he met with him privately and left with what he claimed was permission to reprint the book anyway, as he pleased, and he did. And nobody was really sure what happened in that conversation because it was only the two of them. But it was that point late in McKay's life where people sort of were able to hear whatever they wanted to hear. And yeah, it's a little difficult to know what he really thought. But so yeah, there are other examples of these last years of McKay's life where he's not always as sharp as he had been. And people take advantage of it.
So, but there's enough in the early 50s, right, towards
earlier
1960, that is plenty of evidence that McKay was into the John Birch Society. But he did draw some hard lines against Benson. Benson tried over and over again to become an official member and a rep to the society. And not only did Benson, sorry, what should I say? Should I say Elder Benson, President Benson?
We'll know who you mean.
The book, it's interesting, the book uses McKay and Benson, right, without using any titles.
Yeah, it's a scholarly work. It makes sense. I mean, that's how it would normally work.
Are we scholarly enough to follow that example?
Sure. Yeah. Anybody who chooses, anybody who's going to be offended about that has already turned off this episode. So
Okay, so Benson, right, wants to join and tries over and over again. And in fact, the founder of the John Birch Society tries to get President McKay to let President Benson join.
yes.
Right, but McKay never does. Never goes quite that far.
No.
So the chapter is it's very interesting. There's lots of give and take on these between these two men and between the other more anti John Birch Society members in the Quorum of the 12 in the first presidency.
Right. They're
who
members.
try really hard to rein President Benson in.
Yeah, some of them are quite politically liberal. There are Democrats in the first presidency. It's not a question of like President McKay is one end of the spectrum and Elder Benson is the other end. No, and everybody else is in between. No, like President McKay is probably more in the middle, with somebody like Hugh B. Brown being further to the left and more anti-John Birch and more capable of seeing the kind of damage that it does end up doing.
So what is this damage? What were they doing? What was the society doing?
Well, this is one of the reasons this chapter felt so relevant. Is I felt like I was seeing the early days of QAnon, and I mean that really literally. There was a great article in The Atlantic earlier this year about how QAnon is taking on the form of a religion, and it's being preached over pulpits, and there are meetings being held, and it's behaving very much like a church. And that's kind of what the John Birch Society is. And they're both alike also in the fact that you have to believe in things without a lot of evidence, which makes it rather religion-like also, right? You have to believe that evil people have infiltrated the government, even though there's no good evidence of that. And so I really hope that QAnon collapses in the same way, but I also kind of expect that QAnon is here to stay in one form or another, just like the John Birch Society still has a website, and you can go listen to their scholars talk about, how.
Yeah, at the end of this chapter, the book was written in 2005. It says, oh man, and the John Birch Society eventually diminished in popularity and mission and scope, and now it's not a big deal. But I'd like to read to you a quote from the Wikipedia article on it that says the following. I couldn't believe this when I read it. Trump confidant and long-term advisor Roger Stone said that Trump's father, Fred Trump, was a financier of the society and a personal friend of founder Robert Welsh. So this chain links. So unlike what our poor friends Prince and Wright, who wrote this book in glorious 2005, thought that the society had vanished, instead it has resurged. And there's a quote that says, Trumpism is essentially Bircherism.
I'm on their front page right now. It says, stay informed, get involved. America needs patriots. Be part of the patriot movement to protect and restore American freedom, independence, and our God-given rights.
Mm-hmm.
It's
okay. How did they actually try to affect change?
Well, it's an interesting question, because even at their height, they really weren't that many people, right? There were enough people that if you were heavily involved with it, you felt like everybody agreed with you, but it was never everybody. I'm looking through my book right now, and next to the margins, many times in the chapter on communism, I have rolling eyes. But I mean, you have meetings, you send letters, you collect money, you print pamphlets, you deliver them to everyone in town sometimes. It's pretty First
It's the free
Amendment-y.
press. The answer is that it's the free press.
Yeah.
They tried to publish pamphlets, and they tried to they just talked, right?
Yeah.
And they used the media that they had at the time, right? They used phone calls and they tried to, and they had meetings and conferences which they brought people to attend, and so forth.
Yeah.
Did it work? Did they actually do any damage to communism?
No, I don't think so. I would say it's a lot easier to say they've done damage to us. And
Okay, so this is a direct quote from the book under the last section in the chapter, and it's a great section. It says, it's called The Demise of Communism, right? Although McKay and Benson had both been willing to go to war to fight communism, the war never came. Instead of going out with a bang, the Soviet Union went out with a whimper, collapsing in the late 1980s under its own weight. With its demise, communism, as a successful form of government, quickly became discredited throughout the world. With the gradual opening of archives in the former Soviet Union and other communist states, it has become apparent that some communist infiltration of US organizations and government institutions had occurred. Yet the actual threat of the communist conspiracy to the West never approached the cataclysmic dimensions of which Benson and Welsh had warned. Okay, and this is the part that really got me as I read the book. Nor, despite Welsh claims, is there any convincing evidence that the John Birch Society was effective in combating communism. It was very effective, however, in polarizing Americans, heightening political ill will, and fostering an atmosphere of hate and intolerance. Welsh's attacks on Dwight Eisenhower, John Foster Dulles, Martin Luther King, and other individuals and institutions gradually brought discredit and disdain to himself and his organization. And although the society exists, this is the part I was mentioning, yet long ago ceased to have significant visibility within American society. Oh, how I wish that had stayed the case. But okay, but that's the part that I thought was powerful. It was very effective in polarizing Americans. Now, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we believe in right and wrong.
Sure.
True or false?
Yeah, you bet.
We believe in we believe in polarization inherently.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Okay?
Yeah.
So what's wrong with the kind of polarization that's being described here?
Well, the problem, of course, is that you're taking things that aren't of themselves right and wrong and describing them as right or wrong. And in worst case scenarios, you're taking things that are right and calling them wrong, and vice versa. And the techniques of the John Birch Society are still in use today. Fellow member of our church, Mr. Mike Lee, he's Senator of Utah, was on Twitter a couple weeks ago saying that America is not a democracy, for which he got a lot of blowback. But that "we are not a democracy" meme dates back to the John Birch Society of trying to turn democracy into something that we don't want and a republic into something we do want. And like we were talking about earlier in the episode, as soon as you have definitions that you feel very strongly about, but no one else necessarily even agrees with those definitions, you can make anyone your enemy you want. And when Mike Lee says we are not a democracy, he means it 100%. And it's something he's inherited from the John Birch Society. But what he's saying and what people are hearing are not the same. But when everybody says, what are you talking about? We are a democracy. We are now suddenly people he can dismiss because we don't even know what a democracy is and why it's bad. The tools of the John Birch Society are still with us, and they are still affecting dialogue here in the United States, and even between members of the church.
So if you want to know what QAnon is, we're going to put a link in the video, in the show notes, to a video called about the Flat Earth Society.
Oh yes, I did watch that. That's good.
By a YouTube channel called Folding Ideas. It's an hour long, so set some time aside to watch it. It is worth it. It takes you on a beautiful journey through flat Earth and geometry, all the way down into the what on earth is happening with QAnon.
We'll throw in that Atlantic article about QAnon becoming a religion also.
Yeah, but the QAnon stuff is even more radical than what I'm worried about. I mean, I'm worried about them like a lot, but even just more mainstream stuff, the polarization just between Democrats and Republicans right now is really bothering me. And I have no idea what to do with it, because I'm convinced that some arguments really are just in one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
Like this, let's take, for example, the thing that you said about food stamps.
Yeah.
I love the food stamp program. I think it's vital. I think it's an important part of a social welfare safety net, right? To help people in need, right? That just seems cut and dry, right? But that statement polarizes me against other people who feel the opposite, right?
Yeah. It's been interesting. I've been reading a lot about this the last, I guess, probably the last 5 years, because I grew up hating Hillary Clinton because I grew up in red counties and that was the thing you were supposed to do. And I never really
Right.
thought about her seriously in any way until she was obviously going to be the nominee of the Democrats. And for the first time in my life, I really started reading about her. Around the same time, a fellow named Donald Trump, whom I had, no one had taught me to feel this way. It just came from reading the newspaper as a child, which I did all the time. From about the age of 10, I had a pretty strong impression of him as a bad person. And so at the same time, it's 2016, I said, well, you know what? I don't like either of these people. And it's based on a bias going way back into my childhood. It's time to really examine them and see who they are. And so I read about them a lot from good sources. And my opinion on one evolved quite a lot. And my opinion on the other evolved quite a lot, but they didn't go in the same direction. One person I now have a much higher opinion than I used to, and the other person I have a much lower opinion of than I used to, and it was not high to start with. And I forget how I was going to tie this into what you said last.
Polarization.
Yeah, so like the hatred of Hillary Clinton, that's what it was. So the hatred of Hillary Clinton was not accidental. Newt Gingrich, who became Speaker of the House while Clinton was president, Bill Clinton was president, he has spoken, he spoke at the time and he's spoken now, that he intentionally built polarization into the political system. The House used to be much more bipartisan than it is now in the way they behaved, and he intentionally broke that apart because he realized that as long as you have, we don't have a majority, because it hadn't had a Democratic majority for years until he came in. And he built this like sense of combativeness as a tool to get the first Republican majority, I think since the 40s. And that worked for him, and he kept pushing it. And this idea of rhetorical violence rather than compromise has only grown since the 90s, to the point where now it doesn't sound crazy to imagine. Like if I heard tomorrow that a militia had marched on the Capitol building, I could believe it. Why? Well, because it's already happened in more than one state. We see this acceleration in a way that we talked earlier about how the John Birch Society largely relied on the First Amendment. Well, now people are thinking like maybe the Second Amendment is the way to fight these battles.
It's so distressing because I just genuinely love all these people that I associate with that are lifelong Republicans and that have all these opinions that I really don't have, that I just feel the opposite of, and that cause me distress when I think about them. And I don't know what to do, Eric. It's driving me crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to resolve this conundrum. How can I continue to love my brother when he thinks so differently than me about fundamental aspects of society and how we should govern ourselves? We're both still Mormon. We both believe the Book of Mormon to be true. We both sustain the prophet. Should I give up and just eliminate, influences that cause me distress? Or should I continue to forge these bonds and, and try to defeat polarization? Let me put it in a different way. How do we combat the hatred of polarization and yet not compromise our beliefs in what is right and wrong in politics?
It's a difficult question. There's a lot of research that shows that people are abandoning relationships, decades-long friendships, family members, at increasing rates. And that doesn't seem super Christian to me, but I also completely understand it. On the other hand, the thing that McKay always said over and over and over again is the problem with communism is that it takes away people's free agency. And I think that that might be the tool to thinking about how we talk about people. If someone, when we're having a conversation about food stamps, to stick with that example, denies you the right to your opinion and says that you are wrong and perhaps evil and certainly un-American to hold the opinion you have, they're trying to compromise your agency in order to get you to think as they think. And that, I think President McKay would say, is wrong. He was a staunch Republican, McKay was. Hugh B. Brown was a staunch Democrat, and they worked closely together for a very long time. We can do that.
I suppose. Seems really hard.
No, it certainly does. When we get to the chapter about the education system, we're going to have to revisit a lot of this stuff because of the way that there were sort of anti-liberal pogroms going on at BYU. That's probably terrible phrasing. I shouldn't have said that. But yeah, this issue is not new and it's not ancient. I was just looking over earlier today the Mormons' second epistle to Moroni, where he talks about the final destruction of their people. And that's what happens when polarization reaches its final extreme. Ultimately, you are wrong because it has nothing to do with what you believe or anything else. It's just that you yourself, you as a person, are wrong. And at that point, there's nothing to do but to destroy the sin. And the sin is that person. And that's when society can't sustain itself anymore.
It's terrifying.
Don't forget to vote.
Yeah. What? Okay, that's a terrible place to leave things.
Well, we only did the second chapter for like 2 minutes by talking about Johnson. I think.
Well, give me some good news.
Okay, how about this? Mormons love it when people in the world who are famous say something nice about the church or the president of the church. So I marked all the nice things the presidents of the church from Eisenhower through Johnson said about President McKay. Would you like to hear them?
Yeah, hit me.
Dwight D. Eisenhower said, David O. McKay is the greatest spiritual leader in the world. John F. Kennedy said, I have never met a man as ideally suited and qualified to be the spiritual leader of his people as David O. McKay. And Lyndon Johnson said a number of nice things about him. It's hard to choose one, but the one that I felt as time went on, like any sense of a political subtext disappeared from these quotations. And so I want to read the last one. I'm not meaning to knock Billy Graham by choosing this one, but he's mentioned. I don't know what it is about President McKay, Lyndon B. Johnson said. I talked to Billy Graham and all of the others, but somehow it seems as though President McKay is something like a father to me. It seems as though every little while I have to write him a letter or something. And that isn't like trying to get the vote in Utah. It's just the way he felt. It's just the way he felt.
That's so great. See, this is the kind of what I really hope can happen in the future, right? Is I don't want to say the word bipartisanship because I don't know what that word even means anymore. But what I just want there to be a civil discourse so that we can talk about something like the legalization of marijuana, or the how to handle immigration, or how to approach foreign policy without immediately having people shut down or argue. Like, I want there to be real discourse. One of my favorite sections in The West Wing, right, is there's
I
this
haven't seen
one
it.
awesome scene. You've never seen The West Wing? Okay.
No,
Well, there's one.
television I find very oppressive. Like, I'm very interested in the West Wing, and I'm quite certain that I would enjoy it. But the idea of starting the West Wing is like the idea of starting War and Peace. It's just such a big commitment. That's how I feel about
Yeah,
TV.
Eric,
Yeah.
it's really good.
I hear it is balm to soothe the troubled soul in these troubled times.
It really is. Anyway, there's this one moment where the music swells, and they've been having this argument about how to get the president to, really like change, like maybe to like rejuvenate the message and everything. And at the end, they have this wonderful upswelling of music, and he says, "We're going to change and bring a level of discourse to this country." And everybody's like really happy. It's like the biggest moment. And all it is a statement of civility.
Yeah,
All
and
it
now
is a cry for just genuine discourse.
I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that this was Obama's big mistake, is thinking that we can talk to the other side and they will be civil. And I mean, that's the genius
Right.
of Donald Trump, right? Is never give people a chance to be civil. Instead of discussing immigration, like separate babies from their mothers, right? And then there's no chance for civil discourse, and we don't have to bother with compromise. We just and it's not the right way to do things. I'm pretty sure there's got to be a better way. Let's go to fiction. Let's live the West Wing, maybe.
Okay, good enough. Get out and vote. I do agree that communism was bad. I think that there's a lot of important issues out there, and talk about good stuff.
If communism is bad, and we really want to promote personal ownership, maybe instead of just promoting the Dialogue Podcast Network, we should suggest people get themselves a subscription, pay a little money, and get their own hardback, or not hardback, but softback copies of the journal too. Maybe that would
That's right.
swell the American feelings of ownership deep inside our souls.
Where are we going next time?
Oh my gosh, where should we go next time? We hinted at a couple possibilities earlier in the episode. I'm turning to the table of contents now.
So we're going to be recording next time after the election.
We will.
We'll probably want to talk about something completely unrelated to politics.
Yes, maybe ecumenical outreach, his relationship with other religions. That's quite nice, and
okay,
not so much polarization, a lot more getting along.
All right, chapter 5, ecumenical outreach. And it will, I'm hoping that we can have a main conclusion in this episode of wanting to increase more civil discourse. Maybe you disagree with me on that.
No, I really think that we can't be the people, meaning like the nation we want to be, until we can talk to each other again. And there's no question that won't happen with Donald Trump. So I'm hoping that we can find a route forward. But like I was saying earlier, that article I mentioned, we also can't really, we can't solve our deep political problems until we've solved some of the economic problems. Like, Marx wasn't 100% wrong. As long as our wealth, our income distribution is so lopsided, people are going to be stressed out and looking to conspiracy theories for explanations as to why life is the way it is. We have to be a more Christian people. And I'm not saying that people need to be Christian. What I'm saying is the principles of treating people equally and caring for the poor, like, until we really address those notions, and you can call them liberal if you want to, but as long as some people are Keens and some people are paupers, we are not going to have a democracy, or whatever we actually are, Mr. Mike Lee.